Okay, I have a great show for you today. Many of you have commented down below that this isn't Biden really running the country. This is actually Obama's third term in office. And so, to go over Obama, some modern day stories that are in the news right now, I have with me journalist Scott McKay. Scott, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you're a journalist, an author, a publisher, an editor. You are in the world of research and writing, and you're doing a
Yeah.
great job. You were recently on the Tucker Carlson show. You got tens of millions of views. While you were on with Tucker Carlson, you mentioned that racism was actually diminishing significantly in America, according to data, before Barack Obama's presidency. And then during his presidency, that all seemed to flare up again. And then now it's like the mainstream media is fanning those flames all the time. What did you mean by that? Help me and my viewers understand your comments.
Sure. Well, I guess it's every June, I think, Gallup does a survey of race relations in America. And in June of 2007, they came back, and I want to say the number was 74% across racial lines of people who said race relations in America were good, which was the zenith of race relations, since they started doing the survey. And of course, that was just before Barack Obama got involved in the presidential race in the 2008 cycle. And he had kind of set himself up as a racial healer, I guess would be one way to say it. If you remember the Democratic convention speech that he gave, and he had that famous line that there's no white America, there's no black America, there's only one America, there's no red or blue America, there's only one America. And people saw that and said, hey, this is, if we're going to have a black president, or if we're going to have somebody who, can bring the country together along racial lines, it's got to be according to this kind of rhetoric, right? And he held himself out in 2008 as a presidential candidate as the guy who could actually bridge that gap and finish race off as an issue that people cared about. What no one really knew, largely because the mainstream media made a big point of preventing people from knowing it, was that Barack Obama's background was chock full of hardcore racial animus used to push certain agendas. Like, for example, and I guess we can get into this a little bit. I don't want to belabor it too much, but there were four major mentors that Barack Obama had growing up politically, if you will. First was when he was a kid in Hawaii. He got brought around to see Frank Marshall Davis, who was a friend of his grandfather, and had been a communist newspaper editor in Chicago and was a columnist for the communist newspaper in Honolulu. And of course, Frank Marshall Davis's writings are available. They're a little obscure, but you can find the stuff that he wrote. And I mean, it is hardcore. This is back in the 40s and 50s when most of this stuff was written, but it's hardcore Stalinist agitprop. Okay. And one of the major themes in Frank Marshall Davis's writing is that America is a fundamentally racist society, and that communist Russia had defeated racism in a generation. Not much of that involved all of the people in the gulags who were, probably didn't care so much about racism as they did about, what they were going to eat or how not to freeze to death. But, Davis was very much I won't even say a critic, is an enemy of American society. And in Dreams from My Father, which is sort of the origin story of Barack Obama, there are 22 references to a guy named Frank, who is Frank Marshall Davis. Those references were all scrubbed out of, interestingly enough, the audiobook version of Dreams from My Father, which came out later when Obama was a national political figure. But anyway, Frank Marshall Davis was one mentor. Most people don't know very much about him. The book talks a great deal about that relationship. But then the other three you may know a little better. Derek Bell was the inventor of critical race theory as a professor at Harvard Law School, and he was a mentor of Obama's at Harvard. And then when he got to Chicago, there was Bill Ayers, who, in whose living room Barack Obama's political career began. Obama said, well, he's just a guy in my neighborhood. But the fact of the matter is, Ayers, who's, the unrepentant weather other underground terrorist, is one of the most prominent thinkers on the design of American K-12 education, particularly since Obama's time in office. And so the guys ended up being a major figure, and the book talks about this a good deal, with no scrutiny whatsoever, because all of this was just sort of dismissed as crackpot stuff. And then the fourth one people know much more about is Reverend Jeremiah Wright, whose church preached nothing but racial animus. And when Obama tried to sort of marginalize Wright as a figure in his 2008 presidential campaign, Wright went to the National Press Club and gave this completely hair-raising speech about race relations, essentially saying that Black people and white people don't even worship the same God, because white people's God is the slave owner's God and Black people's God is the, God of the slave ship. And then Obama had to completely distance himself from Wright. So the point is, all of the people who formed this guy as a political figure or an adult even, were people who believed that America was a fundamentally racist country and that America had chickens that needed to come home to roost for this country. And so when Obama, on the eve of his election, said that, we're a few days away from the fundamental transformation of America beginning, everybody kind of thought of that, well, it's just something that politicians say. No, he meant it. And so, his 2008 presidential campaign was very much the greatest political bait and switch in American history. And race was the lever through which he could make all of these changes, politics, culture, economics in the country that most people didn't see coming, and almost nobody would have voted for.
Yeah, interesting. Do you, as you study Joe Biden and Barack Obama, is Joe Biden just a third term of Obama, or is this a completely different show? Because I can see some correlation and I can see some huge differences.
Well, I think there are differences in that if you accept my premise, which is that Obama is a more powerful political figure, even in the Biden administration, than Biden is, he's still not directly running the country. And of course, there's that famous line, and I won't repeat it in full, that, Obama says never underestimate Joe's ability to F things up, right? So this is just because it doesn't look the same doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't intended to be the third term of Obama. You could even make the argument that this is actually the fourth term of Obama, given, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this at some point, given the shadow government that he was running when Trump was president, and you could get into the entire, Russia conspiracy thing and the Mueller investigation, and then all the way into, and the Hawaiian judges who kept coming out of the woodwork, all the way into the 51 intelligence community spooks who at the very end were, saying that the Hunter Biden laptop story reporting was Russian disinformation. And so there is circumstantial evidence that points to Obama as the boss. I don't know that there's a particular smoking gun, and I don't know that there necessarily would ever be, because some of this is not so much, a top-down command and control type of apparatus. Rather, it's just a bunch of people that all agree on the same kinds of things. But Obama is the first ex-president in American history to choose to live in Washington, D.C., right? Everybody else goes home. He buys a mansion in Colorado. And there are limousines bringing people to see Barack Obama all day long, every day. I don't know if it's to discuss movie projects or if it's more likely to discuss politics. But there's that, and of course, I guess it's a couple of years ago now. There was this weird scene when Obama showed back up at the White House, right? And he was treated as a conquering hero. The video was just one of the most bizarre things anybody's ever seen. Joe Biden is walking around the room looking for a conversation with somebody. And yeah, exactly. They're totally ignoring him because they want to talk to Obama. It was kind of alarming. It's like, this is the president of the United States and he's like a wallflower. So that was kind of a telling moment. But more substantially than that, so usually, let's say from one Democratic administration to the next Democratic administration, or one Republican administration to the next, there are people who are holdovers or retreads who are part of the cabinet or the inner circle or whatever. And then there's other people that get brought in from when the guy was governor or senator or what have you. In Biden's case, there's there's a ton of the former and very little of the it's almost nobody who is purely a Biden guy in that administration. Sort of the best examples of that were, I guess, Ron Klain, who was the initial chief of staff, who was Biden's chief of staff as vice president and was on the staff of the Senate Judiciary. Okay. But Ron Klain was an Obama insider all the way back in the first term of Obama. Like if you go and Google, for example, Ron Klain and Solyndra, all right, he is all over the debate about the green energy stuff that Obama was doing in that first term. And if you remember the Solyndra thing with all the federal money that went to this company, and they basically just ransacked it, took everybody, made off with the cash, and then shut the company down 10 months later or whatever. Like Ron Klain was one of the guys who was involved in the decision to give Solyndra that money. So he was an Obama insider while he was nominally working for Biden, and he ended up being the chief of staff to the president. Jake Sullivan was kind of along those same lines. Everybody else is pretty much nothing but an Obama person who, got recycled from the previous administration. So, it might not even be so much that Obama picks up the phone and says, you're going to do X, Y, and Z, as it's just they're all Obama people. And they know what Obama wants and they know what they want, which is the same thing. And so they go and do it. And this is how Joe Biden, who was sold as this moderate, centrist, return to normalcy sort of candidate in 2020, is running the most hardcore left-wing administration anybody's ever seen. So the circumstantial evidence very much points to, this is Obama's third or even fourth term. And it may not necessarily be, like I said, a command and control thing. It may be that Barack Obama so transformed the Democratic Party that this is what it is, that you cannot lead that party or lead the country through that party without embracing the things that Barack Obama laid in place, to an extent that would far outstrip, say, what Ronald Reagan did with Republicans. As somebody who's a big critic or detractor of the Bushes, I mean, what I can say is they tore down Reagan's dynasty and turned the Republican Party into something totally different. There are no Bushes in the Democratic Party, right? Like everybody is an Obama disciple. You don't get to be in a position of leadership in that party unless you embrace everything that Barack Obama put in place in his 8 years in office.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can see, and I figured it was just like aging or something, but now that you say that, like even the Clintons kind of kiss the Obama's rings and bow down, and they take their cues on when to racially stoke something, when to go after Donald Trump, when to bring up the past. It all kind of seems to flow through that Obama lens. So I see what you're talking about there. Yeah. You recently wrote an article. This is big in the news right now, so I want to get your thoughts on it. But these truckers that are trying to use their influence in New York or in Texas. Yesterday, it was announced that Teamster, with their 1.3 million truckers, have decided to give the highest political donation to Trump after backing Clinton, Obama, and Biden. They're now switching, going, Trump has got to get us back on. What are your thoughts on Trump, the truckers, and all these handouts that they're giving to illegals in New York City?
Well, I think that, well, what really got the truckers going in New York wasn't the illegals, although I'm sure nobody over there is happy with that. But like what really torqued them up was this Letitia James, Arthur Engeron, this $355 million fine. I mean, that offended the hell out of all of these people. You know, a lot of whom like Trump to begin with, but I think it's more than that. It's, you know, for one thing, if you're a trucker, you're scared to death of the legal system and lawsuits, right? And the government imposing fines and all this kind of stuff, because you live with that every day. And when they see something like this happen to a guy like Trump, and it's, you know, the other thing is truckers know debt, they know bank loans, right? And the state of New York comes in and says, well, you valued your property to get loan terms. The bank also underwrote the property, and they knew that you were going to inflate the value or give it a positive thing. Everyone does that. They underwrite the loan. They gave the guy the loan. He paid back the loan. And then the state comes in and fines him because they didn't like how he valued his property. And you're a trucker and you're valuing your truck to get loans for all kinds of things. That hits home with these guys. And so I think that's what really torqued them up. I don't know that independent truckers have enough heft to shut down loads going into New York. Okay, like I think they can make a difference, but they can't. I don't think it's like a general strike type of thing that they can impose on that city. But it's just one more brick in the wall, right? I mean, you've got like every real estate developer, financier, hedge fund guy, all these people in New York are looking at this and saying, we've got to get out of here, you know? And I can't remember who it was that I think it was Kevin Leary, really dropped the ball or the bomb on the city. And he's like, every real estate developer does this, right? Like you can't possibly do business in New York if it's even remotely possible that this could happen. You can't, you got to go, you got to get out. And of course, as soon as he says that, Kathy Hochul comes back and goes, wow, we only really were going to do this to Trump. Like nobody else is. And it's like, that doesn't make it better. like, so in other words, you basically are using the judicial system to do a bill of attainder on one guy. Like, no, this is under no circumstances this defensible. So when you have people like the truckers who, you know, Trump has always had a middle class, working class appeal, which is, you know, he doesn't really come from that background, but, you know, he has it. It's similarly to how I would say Tucker has that as well. And it comes from a point of view, which is the in crowd is screwing everybody over. And so, you know, truckers have never really seen themselves as the in crowd, right? You know, you're supposed to go to college so you don't have to be a trucker. Forget about the fact that truckers make more money than most of the college graduates. You know, it's not a desirable avocation. And so, you know, they're looking at this and they see a guy like Trump getting screwed, which he clearly is. And, you know, like they want to get back at the screwers. And so I think that there is you're going to see some sort of a populist wave in 2024. And you know, it can't be positive for the Democrats because it's, you know, it's interesting. When Obama went in 08, it was a populist wave that brought him in. I mean, there were a lot of people that thought, well, we can resolve the racial issue and everything else. But, you know, part of Obama's appeal was, you know, we want to get rid of this Iraq war, which is bad news and nobody wants it. And these fat cats on Wall Street screwed everybody over, crashing the economy in 2008, right? A lot of that vote that went to Obama. 8 years later, it ended up, a lot of it went to Trump. because it was the same sort of populist, anti-in-crowd attitude. And by the time Obama had finished his term as president, the Democrats were the party of Wall Street, corporate America, power. And they haven't done anything to diminish that or attenuate it at all. And so, like, it's not a surprise that the truckers are doing this. And of course, the other part of this is the illegals, which the Democrats want this because it enables them to set a demographic that's going to favor them at least down the road. And corporate America likes it because it depresses labor costs. Which again, for working class and middle class Americans, I mean, okay, this is us getting screwed again. And so, that I think inures to Trump's benefit, even from people that might not personally, like the mean tweets and the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to the racism thing. Just yesterday, Joy Reid, news broadcaster on MSNBC, had a I don't know if it was a TikTok or a YouTube short that went viral, and she's going off about the new Alabama abortion ruling that fertilized embryos are considered children. I personally think Alabama took it too far, but I'm not going to go on and do a racial rant about it. But Joy Reid decides to turn this into a race thing versus a family planning or female reproductive care. And she says, why do the people of Alabama want more kids? There used to be a time Alabama wanted more kids so that they could make them slaves. Are you saying you want more Black kids that are destitute so that you can kick out immigrants and make Black people do the work immigrants are doing now? That sounds slavery-ish. What are your thoughts on this? There's a couple of things. Actually, let me get my thoughts first. Then I want to hear you.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll riff off of you because I'm still. I saw it like a day or two ago, and I'm still trying to unpack it myself.
Yeah, I want to break this down. So, yes, Alabama had slaves. Yes, slavery is a horrible scar on American history, but does she really believe that in 2024 all white people want Black people to become slaves again? I don't believe that is true. Does she think that all Black people are poor and destitute? Because I absolutely know that is not true. She's a Black woman in America making $1.5 million a year, $100,000 a month or more. Also, what work do immigrants do that Black people and white people can't do? And why does a Black person doing blue collar work suddenly sound slavery-ish? Because most of the work that people do is considered blue collar work. I know many white people that do blue collar work. I know Mexicans that do blue collar work. I know Polynesians that do blue collar work, and they don't feel bad about it. In fact, some of them make more money than people in white collar jobs. So why all
we just talked about the truckers?
Yes.
I mean, we just talked about it. Yeah.
Why all of a sudden does this woman who makes 1.5 million from America suddenly want everybody to believe America is evil and racist, and the only reason to have children in Alabama is so that white people can have Black slaves again? It's crazy to keep bringing this up and then saying, why can't we get racism out of our country?
Well, if I can make a smart ass comment to start off my response to you, what I would say is, for as much as Joy Reid hates Donald Trump, that hairdo absolutely pays homage to him. So I don't know if she should yell at her stylist or what, but it's like, hey, the hair doesn't match the critique, for one thing. The second thing is, look, you're trying way too hard, right? Like, I mean, this is one of these deals where she wants, because it's Alabama, it has to be racist. Um, and so, you know, like, I'm with you. I think the IVF ruling is counterproductive. And, you know, interestingly enough, the Alabama legislature, I think passed, I don't know, they passed a bill yesterday. We're recording this on the 27th. I think it was the 26th, basically exempting the frozen embryos from this. And Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, put out a statement congratulating the Alabama legislature. And I mean, you can't get a more, you know, sort of iconic figure in the pro-life movement than Mike Johnson. So, like, I don't think that's a mainstream pro-life position, and I doubt you're going to see too much more of that from other state Supreme Courts or from, you know, federal circuits or the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't think, I think this is sort of a one-off. And there's a lot to the IVF frozen embryo thing that, you know, when this first popped, I did some reading in it, and what I like very quickly realized is it's a deep rabbit hole in terms of like how things work, and like it's kind of a thorny deal. But you know, then you have people like Joy Reid who are incapable of subtlety or nuance or critical examination of complex fact patterns. And it's, oh, they're Alabama people, so they've got to be racist and they want to bring slaves back. And that, yeah, it's like I hardly even want to dignify it with a response, but everything about it is idiotic. And the piece about the illegals versus black people, I think, is something of a recognition by Joy Reid that there is a definite problematic dynamic there. You know, like, and you see it in, say, for example, South Chicago, where there's an enormous number of illegals that have turned up in South Chicago, which, you know, heretofore was a, you know, heavily black area of town. And the locals are absolutely furious about it because, I mean, you know, the school gymnasium at your kid's high school is now a refugee camp. You know, and like in New York, there was that school that they shut down and said, okay, everybody's going to do remote learning because we have to house Venezuelans here. You know, and so, you know, it's like people competing for scarce resources, and it's a quality of life issue, right? Like, and I mean, I think this shows up more with Hispanics than it does with blacks, but it might, you know, that may change in maybe everybody at this point. But like, and I wrote this a few years back, you know, let's say you're Mr. Fernandez and you live in West San Antonio, okay, which is basically not quite the barrio, but sort of a working class area that's heavily Hispanic in San Antonio. You know, and you're a plumber or something, right? You're a second generation American, like you're, you know, you're not illegal, you're a legal Hispanic voter in America. You look around your neighborhood, and when Obama was president, so there was sort of an MS-13 problem, right? The rent house next door had 7 people living in it. You know, the ER was always full because you got illegals there. Your kid's high school, it's tough because place is full of illegal kids who don't speak English, and that kind of slows down everything in the classroom and all this kind of stuff. Trump comes in, you didn't like him, you didn't vote for him because he said things that were a little obnoxious. They're not sending our best and all this kind of stuff. And so Mr. Fernandez gets a little upset about that, won't vote for the guy. But over the next 4 years, that rent house all of a sudden has 2 people living there. And the crush at the ER is not that big a deal. And, you know, the kid's school is doing better and all this kind of stuff. The MS-13 thing in the neighborhood starts melting away. So he votes for Trump, and then Biden goes in, okay, and now there's 12 people in that house. It's a 5-hour wait at the ER when, you know, when your kid breaks his arm playing baseball. The school is basically non-functional at all. MS-13 is all over the neighborhood. Like, in other words, your quality of life, the grocery store is a complete mess, everything, right? Your quality of life and your housing values are, you know, like, how do I sell this house? The neighborhood is now, it used to be a relatively working class neighborhood. Now it's the barrio. How am I going to sell this house? All of those things. worse than that? How am I going to move out of here and get something better? Because housing price is not in the barrio or through the sky. So like this guy looks around at his quality of life and he realizes that a lot of this is tied to the fact that you're awash in illegals, right? And so he's angry. This affects the Black community as well. You know, it affects middle class and working class white people. It certainly affects Asian Americans. I mean, everybody sees this. Even if you're fairly wealthy, you know, you've got an office downtown and there's a homeless camp a block away from your office, right? For, you know, full of people from somewhere else that don't have a place to live because we just brought 10 million people in with no concomitant increase in housing. So where are you going to put these people, right? And there's no place to put them. And so like everybody's quality of life is diminished by this. You know, and well, what I would say is this. So if Joe Biden were fully in charge of his own White House, all right, and you can read a poll and you can see that this isn't a 70-30 issue. It's an 80-20 issue to the bad if you're a Democrat, okay? So like this is something that you would do everything you could do to get it off the books so you can run an election on abortion or January 6th or whatever it is that you think is a good issue for you. Now everybody's going to talk about this. If you're Joe Biden, you want out of this thing. And like everyone has been beating him over the head saying, you have the power to fix it. Like he doesn't need an act of Congress to shut that border down, go back to all of the Trump policies that had turned off illegal immigration to a very large extent, and then start deporting people. They could do that right now. The fact that it's not being done tells you that Joe Biden is not the guy. And Joe Biden doesn't care about illegal immigrants. Like Joe Biden is like, this is not somebody who has a soft heart for, you know, people who don't look like him. He's proven that. And he's also one of the most kind of shamelessly unprincipled politicians of our time. So he can look at a poll and see this. And if it's Joe Biden making the call, okay, let's get this off the books. And so he goes and he preempts all the stuff Mike Johnson would want done and then takes credit for, okay, I fixed the problem. We don't have to talk about it anymore. We shut the border down. Everybody's happy. And now we move on to the fact that the Republicans are, you know, are monsters for keeping women from getting abortions. All right. The fact that this is not being done tells you that he's not in control, and whoever is in control doesn't really care that much about his political future. What they care about is the long-term implications of this illegal immigration, which is maybe these folks get amnesty. You know, maybe they vote lines on the voter rolls that you know, are dead people or people that moved away, right? Maybe they go vote, or maybe they just have kids. And in 20 years, those kids are 18 and are now voting, and they're citizens because they were born in the United States. And they look at this as a long-term play, like, we'll sacrifice Joe Biden's reelection because the 2040 election is going to be one the Republicans can't win because we've got all these people. And you'll notice all these illegals come in, they immediately get a check card and a smartphone, right? Like, they are, you know, the old line was, well, you take immigrants and you assimilate, right? And everybody's like, well, we're not really assimilating these people into the American, you know, culture and values. Like, that's not true. They're assimilating. They're assimilating them into welfare culture. And their kids will grow up in welfare culture. So this is the long-term play. You have to be a hardcore ideologue to want to do this, knowing that you're hurting people along the way when you do it. Like, this is something this is a long-term strategic play that is of a piece with going all the way back decades ago with the Communist Party USA and all of these sort of left-wing revolutionary type people. Again, Frank Marshall Davis, Bill Ayers, like, you can go back through all of those hardcore leftists of the 20th century that Obama marinated in that thought the entire time he was growing up. So, like, to me, I look at this as like, this is one of the most telltale signs that this is Obama and his people who are the real power behind the throne where Biden is concerned, because it doesn't make sense any other way, right? If it's just Joe Biden, garden variety, Union Democrat politician of old, he's going to throw this overboard, and he's going to, okay, all right, like, you got your progress. Now I'm going to get reelected. And it's, I'm not going to say it's late in the game, but like, at this point, it doesn't matter what they do. Everybody's going to know that Joe Biden is the illegal immigrant president. Like, everybody's going to know that brand is set.
Yeah.
And this would have been fixed a long time ago. If this guy was, number one, sentient, and number two, actually in control of his administration.
Yeah. Brilliantly put. In our final minutes together, Scott, tell us about Racism, Revenge, and Ruin. Tell us about your book, and then I'll make sure to leave a link for people down below.
Sure. Well, I wrote the book largely because of the stuff that we're talking about. Like, it was very clear to me that, okay, this guy Biden's not running the country. His policies and the effect of them are a metastasization of a lot of things that happened when Obama was president for those 8 years. And so I started doing some research into, okay, like, specific, like, where did DEI come from? Where did this, the war on like conservatives in the military and things like that. And in every case, this is just a further step of things that Obama set in motion. And so, the book is it's not really a history book, but it's an examination of how we got where we are from the America that is hardly even recognizable at this point, from like 2006, 2007. And, obviously most people think there's a lot of decline inherent in that change. And, so, why did this happen? And what's the genesis of it? The book is, I think, maybe the best thing that's been written on the topic of our societal change over the last 2 decades, how it got there, and who's responsible. And to leave you with this, people who haven't examined this stuff will look at societal changes, like, how did we go from gay marriage to now transgenderism, for example? Where did that come from? There's a temptation or an impetus that you believe these things are organic. No, this is just sort of how society evolved, technology and this and that. The book is a direct refutation of that. None of this stuff is organic. It's man-made. It was contrived and then executed in a whole bunch of different ways, a lot of which were clever to brilliant, but certainly sneaky. Everything from woke corporations to the changes in K-12 education, all of those things, the book does, I think, a really good job in explaining this stuff so that you can understand where it came from and then necessarily how to roll it back. So ultimately, it doesn't come off as a positive, optimistic book, but the effect of it should be, okay, these are the things that need to be rolled back. If we do that, we can get back to the America that we were hoping to achieve when we elected Obama in 2008 and got sold a bill of goods instead.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Well, I'll make sure to leave a link down below, Scott. If people want to follow you online, what's the best place to do that?
Well, I've got 2 Twitter accounts. One of them is at The Hayride, and the other one is at reviver.com, which is RVIVR.com. I've got 2 websites also, The Hayride you talked about before, and Reviver, which is, again, RVIVR. We took the E's out when we got the domain and saved ourselves $50,000. Reviver is kind of a news and video aggregation site, has a lot of its own content as well. I'm a senior editor at the American Spectator. So I got a column 3 days a week at spectator.org. And then, of course, Racism, Revenge, and Ruin is the new book. I'm actually, believe it or not, serializing a novel called King of the Jungle. Every weekend at the American Spectator, we're dropping like a couple of chapters of it. People have read it and telling me it's absolutely great. So check that out at spectator.org.
Okay,
Otherwise, I'm around.
great. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and I'll put those links down below. I hope you have a great rest of your day.